Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode. I have 4 questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, so I have my body recomp checklist. I've actually updated it recently, so it's my body recomp checklist 3.0. The link to it is in the show notes. Make sure you grab it. If you already grabbed the old ones, just reach out to me on Instagram and I'll shoot you over the new one. But again, I go over the 2 types of body recomp, why we want to focus on body composition, and then 10 things that you need in a body recomp. And I think most people typically only do 2 to 3 of them. And so definitely dialing in the other ones would be super helpful. And so if you want to grab that, the link to that is in the show notes. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So again, I have 4 questions. It feels good to always love going over these questions, love getting these. So again, if you have any, reach out to me on Instagram and I'd love to answer them and dive into this some more detail. All right. So first question is around building during pregnancy, actually. I was just curious if you ever have had any client do a muscle building phase during pregnancy. Obviously, my goal isn't to gain a ton of weight. I haven't. So again, should you be focused on building muscle during pregnancy? I think our main thing here is you need to listen to your body. This isn't the time to like overly push any body comp stuff. Your obviously goal there is to take care of the baby. So like to me, that should be like you should be doing things that feel that. So again, that needs to be your number one focus. Now, in saying this, my philosophy with a building phase is it's really anything outside of a fat loss phase, right? So if we're not actively in a fat loss phase, if we're doing things right, we are in some sort of a building phase. It doesn't necessarily have to be a time where you just get into a surplus. And there can be different goals within a building phase. So I would say with that kind of context, yeah, I definitely would. Like if someone was pregnant, again, our goal would be to obviously make sure that they're feeling good. And that's priority number one. And that like this again isn't the time to push any body comp stuff. I feel like I can't stress that enough. Within a building phase, we can build habits, we can build up our metabolism, we can have some sort of performance goal. Now, again, a lot of this doesn't necessarily align with being pregnant because again, the number one goal is to make sure that you are focused on body comp. Or sorry, that is not the number one goal, right? You need to make sure that you are feeling good and prioritizing your baby. And performance probably not going to be something that we're going to be overly focused on. Now, in saying this, if somebody comes at this from, hey, I want to maximize muscle growth and try to do everything I can during that time, here's my thoughts. Could you still build muscle? Maybe, but as I said, that needs to take a back seat. The principles to build muscle are in line with pregnancy, right? Like we need to make sure we're fueling our body enough. We need to make sure that we're fueling it with the right nutrients. We're not just, over consuming calories. We need to make sure that we're recovering. We need to make sure that we're not like overdoing things, not overly stressing our body. So we need to make sure that we are managing our stress. We're getting good sleep. You need to make sure you're getting in enough protein. So a lot of these things are in line with building muscle. But for your body, building muscle obviously is going to be super low on the priority list during this period of time. Again, the fuel is going to be preferred to, again, obviously the fetus, and then obviously taking care of yourself as well too. And because building muscle is like low on the priority list, this just obviously isn't a time to really focus on building muscle. But like I said, all the things that we would do from a principle standpoint do line up with building muscle. So I think really the thing that we would need to look at is just how we do with any building phase. Like we're worried about our inputs. So I would be like focused on our inputs. And then obviously from a training perspective, we have to pay attention to recovery and how you're feeling. You may not be able to do a ton of volume. You may not be able to recover from it, but that's not necessarily anything different than what I would do regularly, where it's if you're under recovered, we would not push that. So that's just across the board there. And even times outside of pregnancy, like we're going to do the best we can to set you up to build muscle, train in a way we know is going to build muscle. We are limited by genetics, whatever. And so we just try and get what we can out of it. And that would still be the same thing with the caveat of recovery and making sure you're not overdoing things and making it just can't stress enough the recovery. Like those need to be the main priority. So really the best time to build muscle is going to be any other time. This would just not be the time where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do my building phase when I'm pregnant. It would be any other time. But that doesn't mean I still feel like we can do things that would put you in a position to do it. And then at that point, we just have to let the body do its thing. As long as you're feeling good, you're feeling your body, and there's no issues there. We just have to let things happen as they do. And we wouldn't necessarily push extra hard to try and build muscle during this time. Good question, but that obviously that needs to be the priority there is taking care of the baby. Some people feel great when they're pregnant to be able to push it. Some people do not. And so it's just like with kind of the menstrual cycle training stuff. we want to auto-regulate. And so you would still want to auto-regulate in this period of time as well too. Am I missing anything by not doing something quote unquote athletic? I don't think you're missing anything huge, especially if you do your cardio, you lift, and you get like movement in throughout the day. But I do think it's probably good to put yourself into some semi unpredictable environments from time to time. Something like lifting, while you have to push yourself, you have to watch your technique. It's predictable. Like the environment is predictable what's going to happen. You do an RDL, you're going to resist the weight on the way down and you're going to lift on the way up. There's not like you have a million other things going on. Obviously, that would be counterproductive to building muscle if you had to focus on other stuff throughout your gym or something. Like, hey, you got to watch out, this person's going to come and potentially run into you at a certain time, so you have to watch that, right? Like that would be semi unpredictable, but you would obviously be taking away from what we're trying to do within the gym in that situation. And then lifting is it's just like static, so I do think people would benefit from doing something quote unquote athletic, because again, it's going to get you in that semi unpredictable environment, which is going to be good from a movement perspective, but even maybe even cognitive perspective as well. So I think it's super important to find movement that you enjoy. So if you do have something that is some sort of sport that you can play once a week that gets you into that position that's semi unpredictable, whether that's pickleball, whether it's some sort of basketball rec league, whatever it is, rock climbing, something along like it doesn't necessarily just have to be a sport, something like that, I think can be super beneficial. You're probably going to get a little bit more out of that than just doing your cardio and your weight training and your steps. But it's not like you're going to complete, like from a body count perspective, you're not going to miss out on anything. From a movement perspective, maybe you're going to miss out on a little bit. And then like we talked about, not getting in that semi unpredictable environment could be, you might be missing out on a little bit, again, from a movement standpoint, but from a cognitive standpoint as well too. So that's why, again, when it comes to this extra kind of movement like this, like I think finding something you can enjoy is helpful, because it's going to ensure that you do it and that you can continue to move regularly. Like one of my favorite things is playing hockey on Sunday, and it's a good way to get some extra cardio in, but I also really enjoy it. So I don't necessarily, I'm like dreading doing this. Whereas there's some days with weight training and cardio where it's like, oh, I really don't want to do this day. Obviously, I've had some days with hockey like that, but for the most part, it's, man, I'm super excited to go and it flies by, and it's a nice thing to do that gets movement, get some adaptation, a lot of different things going on from a movement perspective, and I enjoy it. I think that's a great spot to be in. Well, in saying this, I do want to keep at least some anchors from a training perspective for like adaptation and progress sake. When it comes to training, somebody wants to do group classes, that's fine. We can put a couple of those in, but I would like for you to get 1 to 2 weight training days as anchors where it's a super consistent program. So we know that you're progressing and you can progress. So we know that there's going to be some hypertrophy or strength or whatever you're trying to get from that session. Cardio, same thing. You don't necessarily have to go and ride the bike every single day that you do your cardio, but I think you need to have 1 to 2 days that are anchor days where you focus on performance and utilizing progressive overload. It's hard when you do something different every single time. If you're someone who goes and plays golf or does a sport or something like that, those are good. You're going to get that movement in, but it's really hard to progress, or at least know if you're progressing from a cardiovascular standpoint, because it's just different, right? It would be like going into your weight training and doing something different every single time. Could you be seeing some progress? Maybe. We could look at something like resting heart rate, or we could look at, hey, are you actually building muscle as the thing that's going to tell us that. The resting heart rate would be from cardio, are you building muscle from training? But we're more so guessing at that point. Whereas having that anchor can be something that you really push. So at the end of the day, I think if you have at least 1 to 2 days of anchors from a training perspective, adding in some type of movement like this that is quote unquote athletic could be helpful to add on top of just doing more static type stuff, very predictable kind of environments there. All right. So I did get a question on hunger during a deficit, and I just thought this was super interesting to go over. So the way that they phrase this makes me want to go into this a bit more. I had a question. First thing here is I'm on a calorie deficit, and I feel like before I used to be starving, but this round I don't feel so hungry anymore. I'm not sure if it's anything to be concerned about, but I'm also drinking a lot more water too and trying to keep myself hydrated more. So the thing that I want to pick out here is I'm on a calorie deficit. So this is the thing. So I want to go into some myths and misconceptions around calorie deficits, because I think this is something that I do see very commonly. So it's, hey, I'm on a calorie deficit. So that again, it assumes that, oh, hey, I'm on the keto diet. Hey, I'm following this diet. A calorie deficit it's not like you're on it, right? It's not like you just pick your calories. Hey, I looked at my numbers in a calculator. 1600 is supposed to be a deficit. So I'm going to eat that amount, and now I'm on a calorie deficit. And that's not how that works out. And this is where I think a lot of people get kind of calorie tracking and calorie deficit and energy balance. Like they get this wrong because they think it's like a way of eating. It's, oh, hey, you're on a calorie deficit diet. And that's not true, right? Being in a calorie deficit is a state the body is in. People, 1,600 calories could be a deficit. For some people, it's not. And it's very dynamic. I think that's the first thing that I want to go over here is you're not on a calorie deficit. You would be in a calorie deficit. Now, it could have been a typo, but this is something that I see commonly here where you would be in a calorie deficit, not on a calorie deficit. Now, to get into a calorie deficit, there's a lot of different ways that we could go about it. You could utilize time restricted eating. You could do keto. You could track your calorie. You could eat less calories. You could cut out a certain food group, right? There's a lot of, you can move more. There's a lot of different ways that we can get into a calorie deficit, but it's not this like static, hey, I'm on a calorie deficit. And I think this is where a lot of people get themselves stuck in trying to drop weight is they think that if they follow X amount of calories that they're automatically in a deficit, and that's not the case. So it's a physiological state, right? So that's the first misconception is people think it's a diet style / way of eating. A calorie deficit isn't a diet style like keto diet or Mediterranean. It's a physiological state your body enters when you're eating fewer calories than you expend. And again, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Your food choices and movement are going to be the big levers that influence this. So we have to get into a physiological state where you are consuming fewer calories than you expend throughout the day. And as I just said there, that could be a combination of maybe you typically eat on average 2,000 calories. You drop it down to 1,600. Maybe you go from 8K steps per day to 10K. And that's something that gets you into a calorie deficit. And I'll talk about how you know if you're actually in a calorie deficit. So I think that's the first thing we need to get around is you're not on a calorie deficit. You would be in a calorie deficit. And it's not just going to happen because you're tracking X amount of calories. So that's misconception number 2 is a calorie deficit is a kind of one size fits all number. There's no universal magic number for calories or cardio that's going to fit everyone. Factors like genetics, exercise, medications, and many other things are going to play a role here in terms of what is going to be that number. For some people, 2,500 calories could be like you eat 2,500 calories per day, and that could be a deficit for some people, while others, they might need as low as 1,200 or lower to get into a deficit. People too often think that because so-and-so lost weight on a certain amount of calorie amounts, or again, you put in like a number in a calculator and that's what it gave you, that should work. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. A myth is that this kind of leads to people think that it is something like that, like it is, they're on it because they set a certain number, and now they think that a calorie deficit is not effective for weight loss. While hormones certainly play a role, the fundamental principle of consuming fewer calories than you expend consistently drives your body to break down stored energy to make up for the energy deficit. Why does this? In order for this to happen, when your body consumes less calories than it expends, it's, oh crap, we have these energy needs that are not being met. And so what if you were trying to pay for something with money and you didn't have cash on hand to pay for that? What would you do? You dip into your savings. This is the same thing. You can think of your savings as fat storage on your body, as muscle on your body. And so your body's going to use it's going to use some of that because it needs to make up for that, for the deficit of payment there, or the deficit of money that you don't have readily available. You need to go get it elsewhere. And so that's what happens. So that's a fundamental principle. That doesn't happen if your body doesn't sense that, if it doesn't have that energy deficit, it's going to be like, we don't need to dip into savings. Same thing. If you had the money to pay for something, why would you dip into your savings? You wouldn't. You would use the money you have on hand there. And hormones are important. They definitely play a role in this, but at the end of the day, a calorie deficit is what you need to get to. And I think the reason people think that calorie deficits don't work is because of the fact that they don't have a good understanding of what that is. So a reason a lot of people, again, don't think that deficits work is because obviously they're not seeing the weight loss that they want to see in that, but it typically comes down to not improving food quality. So just trying to fit in too many tasty foods into their diet, and they just have poor tracking accuracy and consistency. And today's modern environment just makes it very tough to actually get into a deficit if you're not actively like getting into it, pushing it, consistent with it. I think the big thing being if you're not actively like 2 feet in and all in on the process, because if you're not, it is going to be tougher to do it. Most people consume more calories than they think. I know a lot of people are going to be like, nope, that's not me. There's no way. But just the way the modern environment is set up, it's way easier to overconsume calories than you think, which leads to many people saying a calorie deficit does not work for weight loss. But in these scenarios, these people are not actually in a calorie deficit despite aiming for it. Another misconception is it's the same as tracking calories. Tracking calories is a tool that can help you control your caloric intake, but it's not the same as being in a calorie deficit. While tracking can be an effective tool, it isn't 100% accurate, and it isn't the only way to get into a calorie deficit. Remember, a calorie deficit is a physiological state where you're consuming less energy than your body needs. So we track calories to get some quantitative data from this, so you have a way to measure what you're consuming. There's no magic to tracking X amount of calories, especially if as we said, you're not on a calorie deficit. You would need to be in a calorie deficit. And tracking calories is a way to help get that structure to make sure that you are sticking to that and to give us data on, okay, you actually maybe need to eat a little bit less food. And then another misconception is it's a static number, right? It's usually not a static number. As you lose weight, your body can adapt and it can become more efficient. So initially, 2,000 calories may be your deficit, or maybe that was at one point, but eventually adjustments might be needed due to increased thriftiness there. So these are some myths around it, right? I think the big takeaway is you're not on a calorie deficit. You would need to get into a calorie deficit. Great. Now you know this information. How would you know if you're actually in a calorie deficit or not? We would need to take our weight multiple times per week, and we would need to see where it's trending. If it's not moving at all, you're not in a calorie deficit. Now, things can get a little bit messy if you're very new to training or you haven't had good like kind of training protocols. You could be losing body fat and building muscle at the same time. This happens more than people think. So we would need to also look at your measurements and progress pictures and how your clothes are fitting, because that can get masked a little bit there. And saying that, if it's not trending down whatsoever, then I would say you're not in a calorie deficit. If it's slowly trending down, you're in a pretty good sized deficit. But we would need to look at multiple weeks. Where's your scale weight trending over time? Again, if it's not moving at all and your measurements aren't changing, if you're tracking 1,600 calories, there's either a couple things going on. You're either not accurately tracking, which unfortunately, as I said, is a big issue for many people. It's a skill and it takes time. Or 1,600 calories for you may not be a deficit. So you decrease your calories a bit in terms of what you're tracking, or you could try and increase movement a little bit. And those can be two ways that you can potentially get that better. Or just look at lifestyle things. Hey, is your circadian rhythm in check? Could you look at meal timing? There's some other things that we could potentially look at there. But the best way to know if you're in a calorie deficit is, where is your scale weight trending over multiple weeks? I don't care about one day to the next. I want to know, okay, what's your average of week 1? What's your average of week 2? What's your average of week 3? And where's that trend line at? If it's staying the same, you probably have some wiggle room there to change your caloric intake, find ways to consume a little bit less, maybe eat a little bit more there. So that's how we're going to know if you're actually in a calorie deficit. Now, as far as the hunger piece goes, I feel like I used to be starving, but this round I don't feel so hungry anymore. I'm not sure if it's anything to be concerned about. So I do think you need to have some hunger if you're actively dropping body fat, but there's some things that we can do to help mitigate hunger to where you don't feel ravenously hungry. And I think a lot of people mess this up. Higher protein, good meal timing, getting your sleep and circadian rhythm in check, watching your stress, hydration. These are all higher food volume, slowing down eating. These are all things that we can do to actively slow down, like to lower hunger. So that can definitely be the case, where just because you don't have a lot of hunger doesn't mean that's a problem or anything. But I do think over time, to be in a deficit, you're going to need to see some hunger. But again, that's also making sure that we're seeing our scale weight trend down over time. If you're a couple of weeks in and you were like, hey, I need to be at 1,600 calories because this is what the calculator spits out at me, and things are not trending down, we need to reevaluate what we're doing. Just because you're trying to be in a calorie deficit doesn't mean that you're actually in a calorie deficit, right? There's no on a calorie deficit. It's not a diet style. So I hope that gives you more insight into a calorie deficit, like what it is, some issues, some myths and misconceptions around it there. All right. I had another person reach out. So I'm currently with a coach and have been for 14 months, but I feel like perhaps my goals are not aligned with her coaching. I reverse dieted from 1,750 to 2,950 calories over duration of my coaching with her, with the aim being to build muscle, but very slowly decrease body fat. But I just feel in a lull and a little disengaged, as I believe I could benefit from a cut to drop body fat, but she believes it would be a bad choice as I would lose muscle mass, which I've worked hard for. So I'm not necessarily trying to pick on this particular situation. It's more so in general. First, I just, the biggest reason I bring this up is because I feel like there's the shift of, you don't want to undereat. We know that women in particular tend to like do a lot of like high volume type stuff, low kind of calories to try and lose body fat and stay lean and get leaner. And we know we can run into issues. So there was this kind of shift of, hey, we want to consume more calories, which is good. I think generally speaking, we need to spend periods of time where we consume more calories. But I feel like with a lot of things to fitness, the pendulum swung so far now where it's, if you're eating, you can't ever eat less than 2,500 calories now. And like the goal is to get calories as high as possible. And you should always be eating that way. And you should always be trying to build muscle, and you need to be doing everything possible to build muscle. So you need to be in a surplus. And so I feel like this has led to this kind of now where people are scared to eat under 2,000 calories. They think there's some sort of issue going on, or if they eat under 2,000 calories, they're not going to build muscle and everything's just going to be ruined. They're going to lose all their hard-earned muscle. And so I feel like the pendulum swung too far. And now when that happens, we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole here with a lot of people, because it's, oh, if you go into a deficit at all, you're just going to lose all the muscle that you've built. And so now people think they need to be in the surplus, and they keep pushing a surplus, and they keep eating a lot of food when maybe they're not feeling super great in their body composition, and their body composition gets worse. But it's like, hey, I also don't want to undereat, so I need to keep doing this. And I feel like coaches push that too, where it's like, no, you just need to keep eating a lot of food. Just eat and eat. And I just don't think that we need to do that. So a couple things I want to go over here is one, you're not going to lose your hard-earned muscle. If you've been doing a building phase or you've been eating a lot of calories for 3 to 6 months plus, and you feel like you would benefit from losing some body fat, I think that you need to have that conversation. And I think that you're not going to lose your hard-earned muscle, especially if you do fat loss right. People that are going to lose their hard-earned muscle are going to be people that don't have poor methods to fat loss dieting. But if we can be smarter with our methods, you could still potentially even build some muscle in a deficit. Is it going to be the same as being at maintenance or a small surplus? No, but I think a lot of people don't realize that they have some wiggle room there. We also don't have to be in a surplus the entire time. So could you potentially lower your calories a little bit? Like instead of eating at 2950, could it be a little bit lower? Does it have to be that high the entire time? I don't think so. I also think the methods need to match where your body's at. And this is where I think a lot of people and a lot of coaches go wrong is they have their methods and it's this is how we need to do it. No exceptions. They don't ever take anything else into consideration of this is bad. You should never do that without really taking into consideration where the client's at and maybe you can switch things up because of the current state that they're in. So in this particular example, okay, it's been 14 months. Maybe this person now could get a lot out of being in a deficit, not only potentially physiologically, but definitely psychologically there. Now, again, I think we can over diet and we can do too much, but there's just a little bit of need to meet the client where they're at. And we need to pay attention to the mental side of things versus feeling like we have to stick to a certain thing and just, oh, hey, we have to push a lot of calories all the time because if you don't, you're going to have you're going to get metabolic adaptation. You're going to lose all your muscle and you're going to go backwards when, now this person is not happy with their physique and they're going to continue to, in my opinion, if they keep pushing this, like they could potentially see their body decrease. And if they're not bought in on what you're doing, it's like now training is probably not as good. Food quality is not as good. And these are all going to be things that are going to impact their body composition. But if there's one takeaway here, it's we need to stop trying to force square pegs around holes. We need to meet the client where they're at. We need to make sure that we need to meet the client where they're at and where their body is currently at. And if somebody has a decent amount of body fat levels, they're not super lean, I don't think they need to necessarily keep consuming a ton of calories for whatever reason there. And my other kind of takeaway here is just because you go into a deficit, you're not going to lose your hard-earned muscle. Anyone who says that, they don't know what they're talking about. You're not going to lose your hard-earned muscle by just going into a deficit. Now, if you crash diet, eat 800 calories, go low protein, don't weight train, just do a bunch of cardio, then maybe you will lose a little bit of that muscle. But if you do things right, that's not going to happen. That's kind of my main takeaways there are you're not going to lose your hard-earned muscle. And we need to think about where your body is at currently. And that's going to alter our decision-making versus just having this blanket, like, no, you need to eat as many calories as possible. And you can't be in a deficit because you're going to lose your hard-earned muscle. And can we just try to force this square peg in a round hole there? So that's it for this episode. I hope this was super helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this. If you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. And then you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. That's it for this episode, and I'll chat with you guys next time.